right, welcome everybody back into another episode of the Big Douglas Show. It's a Wednesday during the season. You know what that means? It's Opposition Wednesday, and here to get us ready for the Giants is Nick Falato. Nick, how are you?
Big Doug, thank you so much for having me. Could be a little bit better right now. The New York Giants season isn't going as planned, but Washington and the Giants, Washington, they haven't had the best of luck against the Giants in recent memory other than 2021, but we'll overlook that year.
We'll get into all the business of it, but first, let's get to know you a little bit. How did you become a Giants fan?
I grew up a Giants fan. I was born and raised in northern New Jersey. My father was a diehard New York Giants fan. I was indoctrinated to the cult of New York Giant fandom at a very young age, have a strong disdain for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. Don't love the Washington Commanders, Redskins, football team, whatever you guys are calling yourselves these days. But I would say it's been a long journey. The only thing I've known is being a New York Giant fan. And now I have the pleasure to cover the team professionally, and that's just been an honor.
And that's with the Big Blue Banter. How did you get hooked up? How did that start? And what guys got going on there? Check out myself. It's really good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, Big Blue Banter is myself and CBS's Dan Schneier. We go through the coaches tape, the X's and O's, the all-22, and we talk a lot about the scheme of what's actually happening, why it's happening, how it's happening, what the coaches are thinking, and really dive deep into the nitty-gritty details of this game that I love, football. And I also write for Big Blue View, which is SB Nation's New York Giant fan page. Do a lot of stuff for Patty Traina for Sports Illustrated as well during the draft, a little bit more so, specifically curtailed towards the New York Giants. But yeah, it's been great over the last, 3 or 4 years.
It's interesting, right? We were talking a bit offline about COVID and what all it has led to. This is one of those things, right, where it's like podcasting has taken on a bigger role, I think, in what how sports is covered. Everybody's got one or looking to get one, it seems like these days. What do you think is next in the progression of how we cover sports and social medias?
I'm not sure. Who knows with AI and all that kind of stuff kind of coming down the pipeline. I think podcasting has certainly taken over a little bit as a primary medium for a lot of people who digest sports. At least I'm talking anecdotally with my friend group and myself. I grew up watching First Take. I grew up watching a lot of these big programs with big personalities, and I loved doing it, and it was like fun debate. But then I started finding more niche podcasts that are more tailored towards my desires and what I liked and what I wanted to hear, and it kind of avoided just the fluff and the hot takes and things of that nature. And that's kind of what we have with our podcast and a lot of other podcasts like the Athletic Football Show and things of that nature that I feel like do an excellent job actually covering the objective analysis of football.
And it's crazy. I had former player Chris Long on the show last week, and we were chatting about kind of the evolution. And now these guys, former players with podcasts, the access they're getting, like I could never before remember a time when GMs were coming on podcasts like that. It's nice because I think they're really starting to pull the curtain off of some of the stuff that that's what we want, right? Is to be able to see that stuff.
Yeah, and it's also, if you do well with podcasting and you are able to generate a following through Twitter and all the social media engines that are out there, you can get noticed out there, like not being a former player. Obviously, being a former player, you can really monetize and take advantage of those opportunities because you have a wealth of knowledge to offer a lot of people, and there are a lot of interested people out there. But it's not like you have to work for this huge conglomerate or this huge company to get recognized and to cultivate this following. So I always thought that was pretty neat behind podcasting and social media in general.
Do you do both writing and podcasting? Do you prefer one to the other?
I don't think I do. Maybe podcasting a little bit more than writing, but there are times where I just love to sit down and just dive into it and really articulate myself, not in an impromptu manner where I'm having a conversation. I'm a conversationalist. I love to talk. But at that same time, you can really pick and choose your words very carefully when you are writing. And I do appreciate that about writing.
And you're in like a quiet room somewhere, you've got tunes on. What is the best atmosphere for writing for you?
The best atmosphere for writing for me is me just in my studio right here in Phoenix, Arizona. I'll have my dog come in whenever he needs something. My bulldog, he'll jump up here. He'll bother me. Usually I'll close the door if I'm have to write a really big piece. But Yeah, that's probably my best. I don't really do any tunes. I've tried it and it just distracts me. And I'm like, oh, I like this, and I'm like, oh crap, man, nah, I need to get back to focusing on what I'm trying to do.
What's the dog's name?
Phoenix, actually.
Ah, well, there you
Yes.
go.
Now, again,
Love it.
I'm from New Jersey. This is a chapter in our life. We moved out to Phoenix, got a dog, named him Phoenix, and now we're moving back to New Jersey shortly. So just a nice chapter, give him that name. It's not the corny, hey, I've lived here my entire life. Let me name the dog after the city I grew up in.
No, I appreciate it. Kind of like a tattoo from where you've been. Let's get. It's interesting. I had El Jefe from the New York Revival on before the season started, just to kind of talk about, the state of the union for the Giants. And yeah, obviously, most of the people I talked to, optimism was high. And in fact, last year we spoke. I think a lot of people about the difference that coaching makes and how much that staff had really improved the team last year. Let's start there. What is kind of going on from the head coach down, and as to why it's not seemingly working this year?
Firstly, I think one of the main reasons why it's not working this season was a regression beneath the mean, but a regression to the mean. Because last year, the New York Giants, they won a playoff game. I don't want to say they were overly fortunate. They benefited from winning a lot of close games, which doesn't always carry over season in and season out. The Minnesota Vikings are experiencing that right now. The Giants benefited from a missed field goal against Tennessee. The defense really capitalizing on in crucial situations last season that ended up leading to wins. That's just not happening this year. And if we start with Brian Dable and we start with week one, the Giants, all the hype, they added Darren Waller, they had a great draft. All of that was warranted. But trajectory, it's not always linear. It doesn't always ascend. And it started going down, and the Giants got punched in the mouth, frankly, by the Dallas Cowboys, 40-0 at home. And on your first drive, the offense moved the football well against that vaunted Dallas defense. And then Andrew Thomas had a false start penalty. Then John Michael Schmitz had a botched snap. And then it was 3rd and long, and the Giants couldn't convert. Understandable. Let's kick a field goal, get out of here. It's first drive. Okay. What happens? A blocked field goal, return for a touchdown. And on that play, star left tackle Andrew Thomas tweaks his hamstring. We haven't seen him since, other than he finished most of that game with the tweaked hamstring, even though the Giants were down huge, which is inexcusable. That's, I would say, a little bit of an indictment on this coaching staff. But maybe Ronnie Barnes passed him. I'm not sure. That's the Giants' strength and conditioning trainer, or just lead trainer, physical trainer. So after that, it's been a cascading effect where Murphy's Law has applied. Everything and anything that can go wrong has gone wrong for the New York Giants, has went against the New York Giants, other than the second half of week 2 against the Arizona Cardinals. And if you look at that, without that half, the Giants have one offensive touchdown on the season. We're through 6 weeks. Without that half, we have one offensive touchdown, which was on a short field in week 3 against the San Francisco 49ers. Just a wham double trap run by Matt Breida for, I think, like 13 yards for a touchdown. That's the only offensive touchdown not in Glendale, Arizona in the second half of week 2. So that's the offense has been just really bad. I think most of it does stem from the offensive line, the lack of protection, the loss of Andrew Thomas, the loss of John Michael Schmitz, and risks, frankly, that Joe Shane took in keeping certain players on this roster, cross-training them, be like, yes, we're going to have a guard be our backup center. We're going to have a guard be our backup tackle. And when that sounds well and good, right? But when you apply it to an actual football game and you're going up against defenses like the San Francisco 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys and really good defenses, they're going to exploit it. And they've exploited it the entire time. Daniel Jones hasn't taken that step. The kid's getting his ass kicked back there. He's just getting beat up every game in, game out. He's a limited quarterback to begin with. So Brian Daboll's having to work with all of this, and he's trying to adjust. But when you don't have an offensive line, you can't run your offense. The defense has a lot of new faces on it, and you're facing teams like the Bills and the Miami Dolphins. It's just,
Right.
it's not going to work for you. And I just think this has been a huge, humbling experience for Giants Nation to recognize we're not there yet. We are not near the top of the division. We are not that football team. But right now, I think it's just focusing on being healthy, getting healthy, and hopefully trying to spark some magic late in the season against teams like Green Bay and the Patriots and the Jets and, frankly, Washington.
Reports are going around that the quarterback may need another neck infusion. Does not
Yeah.
sound good. I know they've cleared him for throwing activities, certainly not for contact. We can get there. I mean, most of that's speculation, but I guess before we get there, what is it that didn't click this year that clicked last year? And who, I guess, who was the biggest contributor to him getting the money?
The biggest contributor to the money would be Joe Shane and the front office, and we should tackle that because
Yeah.
I don't think the New York Giants were wrong paying Daniel Jones. You're paying a 25 at that time year old quarterback who took a huge step forward with the first progressive coaching staff that he's had in his entire career. You could say maybe Pat Shermer, but the 2 years with Jason Garrett, their primary focus was we're going to limit your turnovers. And in doing so, he became a wildly conservative quarterback. The Giants, people think the Giants were a good football team just when you look at the fact that they won a playoff game last year. They were last in explosive plays. They couldn't throw the ball down the field. So what do? You go out, you add Darren Waller, you add Paris Campbell, you draft Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round. You bring in a lot of these weapons who can assist you in creating explosive plays, but now you don't have the time to do so. And Daniel Jones, he's reticent to let it rip. He's hesitant to throw the football down the field. And there are a lot of coordinators, Jack Del Rio being one of them, who puts a lot of tape out there with no respect for Daniel Jones. When the ball, and watch this too on Sunday if Daniel Jones plays, when the ball is on the far hash, Jack Del Rio just leaves so much open on the wide side of the field
Knowing he
outside the
won't get there.
numbers. He's like, you're not going to throw it there. You don't want to throw it there. And guess what? The Giants don't attack there all that often. Tyrod Taylor did a little bit against middle of the field closed, single high safety looks when they were in man coverage, so cover 1 essentially. He did that twice against the Bills, trying to create some space, and Darius Slayton came down with 2 30-plus yard receptions. But over the last year and a half, the Giants have not attacked that area of the field. And I think there's been a lot of tape on the Brian Daboll offense with Daniel Jones as the signal caller. And we saw this late last season against the Philadelphia Eagles in the divisional round. You watch how they were playing the Giants, no respect for the deep ball. They were just coming down on everything little. James Bradbury had an interception on a little quick hook route to Darius Slayton. He just drove right through the catch point, knew exactly what was coming because the Giants didn't want to push the football down the field. Now you have a whole year of tape on that, and teams are playing the Giants like that while also just, I believe, manipulating the protection package of what Bobby Johnson, the offensive line coach, the much maligned offensive line coach out here, what he's attempting to do. And you don't have Andrew Thomas, and you don't have John Michael Schmitz, and for a large part of the season, you didn't have Saquon Barkley. So all of those factors just led to the defense just absolutely stalling out. They didn't take the step that many believed they could with Darren Waller, with Paris Campbell, with this, with that, with that. So those are the reasons why I think the Giants have just flat out fell on their face. That, and also they've played really good defenses, and the schedule is much harder. Look, you're not beating up on the AFC South this year. Giants benefited from playing the AFC South. They swept them. They swept the AFC South last season. That's not going to happen against the AFC East. They already have 2 losses against them, and now you have the Jets and the Patriots. Those are the 2 beatable teams. But the Jets, man, they're a feisty bunch. You don't really want to mess with them, and there's a lot of personal feelings there. New York, obviously.
It's interesting. Part of what you mentioned there were the injuries, and I mean it's right to note them. I mean, one of the premier running backs in the league has not played. One of the best left tackles in the league, for my money, hasn't played. One of the up and coming centers that were playing really well. I mean, how much do you say? It's tough to get started when you don't have all your horses out there running.
It is tough to get started, but again, with Daniel Jones, the offense, he needs to, like, that contract was given to him with the presence of mind that he would take that next step in his development and unlock every inch of the field. You want to attack every inch of the field. And I think physically, when he's healthy, he can do that. Like, he doesn't have the biggest arm. He doesn't have a Josh Allen arm. I don't even know if he has a Sam Howell arm. I've watched some Sam Howell. Sam Howell slings that football, man. He's got a pretty big arm on him. But he can make those throws. But when those opportunities have presented themselves, this dates back to last year too, just he's more of a check down guy. And it's like, if he wasn't mobile, who would Daniel Jones be? And that's something that
You're a first rounder.
Yeah, well, there's that, but I would argue that he shouldn't have been a first rounder to begin with back in the 2019 draft, but that's neither here nor there. He's here. Giants gave him a second contract. He hasn't taken that step, hasn't really had the best chance to take that step. I'll give him that. But there are a lot of excuses among Giant fans, if you're on Giants Twitter, made about Daniel Jones. And if you just turn on the tape of other quarterbacks who do make throws all around the field, you'll see defenses respect them in that manner. You don't see that with the New York Giants right now. And maybe with a better offensive line and more protection, he will. But last year, when the offensive line was a little bit better, still wasn't great, you didn't really see that. And I've seen how defensive coordinators, again, like Jack Del Rio has called. He's like, okay, I'm going to put a curl flat defender to defend basically 20 yards of space outside the numbers. And I don't think you're going to throw the football. We're just going to sit our flat defender when we're in cover 6, roll a safety deep, and just leave so much space between that flat defender and that safety while shading everybody else towards the boundary side of the field, the short side of the field, because I know that's your first read. And when your first read isn't there, you get your second read on that same side and he's not there, you run. So we're going to close the B gap. And teams are really tracking on that right now, and I'm just hoping the Giants can challenge that. If it is Daniel Jones, you got to come up with some sort of adjustment off that. And if it's Tyrod, same thing. I mean, Tyrod was adequate. I felt like he played well on Sunday Night Football against the Buffalo Bills team. I still think Daniel Jones is especially with, Tyrod's like about 33, 34 years old. Daniel Jones is 26 right now. You want to move forward with Daniel Jones, especially if they're giving him that contract. But Big Doug, man, it's not great right now when you're talking about
the fan bases always love the backup quarterback, Nick. They always love the backup quarterback. Now, I like Tyrod Taylor for all his career, and think, if one thing had gone that way or one thing had gone that way, maybe he'd have had a chance. But at 34 years old, I think you're probably right about his chance of actually being the guy. Probably gone. What's the prognosis on Anthony Thomas? How much longer was he out for? Do you know?
Yeah. Thomas, we don't know. So we thought this would be like
a twinge in the hamstring. Doesn't sound like a 5-game missing type thing.
No, if it was, the Giants would have put him on the IR, but he re-aggravated it, I think, during practice in week 3, maybe, like right before the game in San Francisco. I think he was getting a limited session. He re-aggravated it. And since then, it's been really quiet and really hush-hush. And we're not certain when, if he'll be back. I mean, if you're Andrew Thomas and the Giants are, 1-7, 1-8 in a couple of weeks, don't rush him back. But at the same time, it's like you didn't put him on the IR, and we've been doing, roster gymnastics right now. We signed Justin Pugh to the active roster today, which they had to do because Justin Pugh played well after tearing his ACL last year. He was straight off the couch, like he said on Sunday Night Football, was supposed to play left guard for the Giants. And then Josh Azudu, our third-round guard that we selected out of UNC, got hurt. He was playing left tackle instead of Andrew Thomas. You move Pugh to left tackle, held up relatively well. Signed somebody off of Joshua Mills, I believe, off of Atlanta's practice squad, brought back Tyree Phillips from the Eagles practice squad. That's the state of the Giants offensive line. And I've watched a lot of this matchup, Washington and the Giants. Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, those are two of the baddest dudes in the NFL, and they don't get the respect that they deserve. And I've seen those two just manhandle the interior offensive lineman of the New York Giants over the last 3 or 4 years, one of them being a current Washington Commander in Nick Gates. So I'm a little nervous about this matchup regarding the upfront with the offensive line.
How did you like Nick Gates?
I loved Nick Gates. I think Nick Gates, he is the type of offensive lineman mentality you want on the football field. You want to hit our quarterback a little late. I'm going to run at you. I don't care who you are. Aaron Donald. He got into it with Aaron Donald a couple of times. Like, he has that type of mentality, those brass balls, if you will, that you want out there. And also just a great story. He had to overcome that devastating leg injury that he suffered in, week 2 of the 2021 season against the Commanders. He was a former undrafted tackle who played guard for the Giants, who then moved to center. He's an adequate center, though. He's an average player at center. He's not going to lose you games, but he's not somebody who is going to really set the tone and pave paths. But he's smart. He's he's wildly tough. And I'll tell you this, the Giants could have used him this season. That's for sure. But what was it? 3 years, like $18 million. It was a decent chunk of change.
They gave him a little bit of money, yeah.
Yeah.
What's the feel? They gave him money knowing he was going to be their starter.
What's the feel for him in Washington? I haven't watched much tape on the offense. I think I saw the Thursday Night Football game. He was losing badly against Chicago's front.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Sam Howell holds the ball way too long, looking for big shots. It's not even that he can't get through his reads because we do the film breakdown too, and he's getting through there. The pockets hold up fairly well. I think he's got to his clock's got to speed up, and then so it's hard to evaluate the offensive line. You know that when you're not getting the quarterback to hold his end up of the bargain, and so it makes them look bad. But the fan base love Nick Gates. To your point, I mean, he's out there shoving folk after the play, and if the quarterback's been hit and he was in the end zone. Doing a dance with the fellas the other day, so in the 4 touchdowns. So I think they have responded to him, and it's what this group needed because we've got a lot of like what do they call them, good character football guys. And I'm not saying he's not one, but we
No.
don't have very many get in your face type guys. And so I think that energy was really needed on this team.
You needed a kneecap eater. Dan Campbell would be really happy. Exactly. And Nick
Nick,
Gates,
if
he loves
either of
himself.
these two are either of these two teams are similar as these D lines, which of these two teams ends up with more sacks on Sunday, do you think?
Sam Howell loves to hold on to the football. That's been my
He
biggest.
gives them. He's like Oprah. Here's a sack for you. Here's a sack for you. Here's a sack for you.
Yeah, he's full on Oprah mode with that. See, the Giants, it's funny because they have the and it's an accurate one because I think the Giants, well, right now I think they're sixth in blitz percentage, but they were second behind Minnesota just 2 weeks ago. But they played Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills the last 2 weeks, and they dialed back the blitz. They played a lot more too high shells. Wink Martindale's not typically a too high shell type of guy against those two teams. He played cover 2 more than we've seen him play over the last season and a half he's been with the New York Giants. So you'll probably see more man coverage, middle of the field closed, gap yourselves out up front and force Washington to run into more loaded boxes with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. So the Giants, I'm looking at the stat right now. They are right now, they're down there in sacks. I want to say. I don't have the defensive stats in front of me, but before last week, I think they only sacked Josh Allen. I don't even know, actually. They got after him and pressured him, but I don't know if they actually finished a lot of those sacks. Dexter Lawrence doesn't have a sack this season. Leonard Williams, I think, has a half sack. Kayvon has 4 sacks, matching his total, but he hasn't really taken that step yet. I like Kayvon Thibodeau a lot, but he hasn't taken that step yet. I think the Giants will pressure Sam Howell, knowing that he holds on to the football too much, and they're going to be much more blitz-minded than they have been over the last 2 weeks. So I'm tempted to say the Giants, but I've seen the Giants' offensive line, and I'm like, yo. And I don't know if Montez is playing in this game because I know he has like a thumb injury. But
I would assume that he does.
Yeah, and he's a tough SOB, Montez Sweat, man. I interned at the Senior Bowl the year he was down there, and he was a part of the defensive line group. So I was around him a lot, and I got to see him practice. And just, I don't think I've ever seen a human with more broad shoulders with his physique than Montez Sweat. Like the guy is just so massive, so long, so wide. And I think he's one of the most criminally underrated players in the NFL. I don't know if Washington fans agree with that, but I just, every time I watch him, I love his game. And I'm going to go with the Giants. I think Dexter gets fed in this game. I think we get a sexy Dexy dance. I think you're going to see some Jason Pinnock coming off the edge, the safety.
No, Ojulari, is he on the IR? Is he out for the year, Ojulari?
Yeah, he's on the IR. I don't know if he's out for the year. Azeez Ojulari is a very explosive, good pass rusher. Not that great against the run right now, not as physical maybe as you want, but he's the most explosive player on the Giants regarding pass rushing, more so than even Kayvon Thibodeau. He just can't stay healthy at this point, and that's where it sucks, Big Doug, because who is that other pass rusher opposite Kayvon that's not an interior guy? Because they put Jihad Ward out there, who is more of a run stuffing guy. They put Boogie Basham out there for like 10 snaps, and he's non-existent with rushing the passer. So that's one other thing that I think the Giants need to find a way to seize is who's going to step up opposite of Kayvon Thibodeau, not named Dexter Lawrence. But I want to ask you real quick, just because we're on this topic, how has the interior parts of the offensive line held up? Because Dexter Lawrence, yes, he doesn't have a sack right now. You turn on the tape, splitting double teams, throwing guards and centers to the side. He's an absolute monster. So I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty good. I think it's probably the strength of that offensive line, actually. They've got Sadiq Charles, who they drafted in the 3rd round a couple of years ago, tackle out of LSU with that Burrow championship. He got slid into guard, which I think he's better suited for. They finally have done that. He's another one that hasn't really been healthy. So it's been a fairly good year for him. And then Sam Cosmi, the 2nd round pick from 3 years ago out of Texas, who played tackle, they finally moved him into guard. about halfway through last season, and he reminds me a lot of Brandon Sheriff once they finally got him into guard. It feels like, and we won't call him an all pro yet, it's year one, but he's shown that he's getting it, and of course still learning the position. I think people think, oh, you just slide from tackle to guard, no problem. As you well know, there's a bit of a learning curve there too. So I think they like what they have, and they're all, I mean, Gates would be the oldest of the group there.
Yeah.
So I think they definitely like the idea that maybe they can get the three of them growing together. And of course, they drafted Ricky Stromberg to eventually take Gates' spot at some point.
Cosme is interesting because he's like 6'7". He's very large. And
They're both big guys.
There's a conversation around Giants Twitter right now because Evan Neal, the right tackle for the Giants, he's struggled. He shows you flashes of, oh man, that's a good set right there, but in pass protection, the consistency down in, down out is wildly off. He's very off balance. So there's a lot of people discussing moving him to guard, and one of the detracting arguments from that would be he's 6'7". Can he play guard? So I'm interested to see how Cosme plays with that same similar height. But Cosme is much more, not that Neal's lean up top, I think, but Cosme's probably not as, I wouldn't imagine he weighs as much as Evan Neal.
I wouldn't think so. It's also weird with Neal, right, Nick, because you don't think of guys coming out of that program and not like having the techniques down. From what little bit I've watched of Neal, it's like it's a technique thing, and it's kind of weird.
It's a technique thing, and it's also just the Giants can't handle twists up front. And this is something you guys are going to do. If you align a 4-eye technique, which is a defensive lineman on the inside shoulder of the tackle, and then a wide 9 technique, somebody who is wide of the tackle, and you do this on passing downs, all you have to do is send that 4-eye right through the B gap, right through that inside shoulder. The guard always fans out to him, and then loop the end man on the line of scrimmage, the wide 9 through the A gap. And if the center is sliding to the other direction, if he's paying attention, like say if you align a 1 shade to the opposite side, there's going to be a wide open gap for that player to loop into. And this is something that the 49ers did against the Giants, something that Miami did against the Giants, Seattle did it against the Giants. It's just the protection of this team. A lot of people are calling for Bobby Johnson's head, the offensive line coach of the New York Giants. Look, my thing on that is I'm not in the room. I don't know what these kids are being taught, but the indictment that you can levy towards Bobby Johnson is none of the young players that Joe Schoen and even Dave Gettleman gave the Giants roster drafted have developed at all on the offensive line. So there has to be some blame levied towards somebody. And to me, that would probably be Bobby Johnson. So yeah, man, you guys could do a lot of funky stuff by bringing 4 pass rushers and still getting home against.
Well, it's interesting. Last week against the Falcons, to kind of stop that run heavy attack they put out their Cinco package with the 5 defensive linemen. And they've been working on that a lot throughout the preseason. I was surprised they really haven't used it a ton. I would imagine with Saquon and the wanting to run the ball, we probably will see that Cinco package a bunch more on Sunday. Nick, I always wrap these things up like this. If Ron Rivera walks into the office and says, Nick, tell us what we've got to do to beat the Giants, you would tell him what?
Pressure, get pressure, attack the offensive line, come up with adjustments for sure. And then on the defensive side of the football, don't turn the football over. Now, the Giants haven't won the last 2 football games, but the Giants are +5 in the last 2 football games. And you got to watch out for linebacker Bobby Okereke throwing over the middle of the field because his length.
He's been fantastic this year, right? Like really well,
it started slow, but right now he's playing at an elite level. The length that he has, I think 34.5-inch arms, which is like 97th percentile. So he's a long wingspan. He closes windows very quickly. Josh Allen, he forced an interception. He forced 2 interceptions, picking one of them off against Tua Tagovailoa, punched the ball out from Gabe Davis as well last week. So he's flying around the field. I think you just got to limit the mistakes. And this might be difficult for Washington because you guys are a little bit mistake prone regarding protecting Sam Howell because Sam Howell needs to protect himself from himself. At least that's what I'm collecting right now and what I saw a little bit from the film last week. I think he dropped back, 28 times, completed 14 passes, was sacked 5 times. It's like you shouldn't be sacked 5 times like when you don't drop. So I think, yes, you need to protect the football on defense. I would tire out the Giants defense and also just do what every other team has done against the New York Giants. Get pressure, win your one-on-one matchups, contain the pocket. The Giants don't want to traditionally drop back and do 5, no one really does 7-step drops. They'll do 5-step drops. They don't really want to do that. If they align under center, they might hand the football off, but they want to work their play action game. You need to shut down the run. And they also want to get either Tyrod or Daniel Jones out on the edge. That's what they want to do. That's what they do. They led the NFL in bootlegs last year. There was a reason for that because their quarterback is athletic and he does well throwing windows from backside crossing routes. And if it's not there, he can pick up 6 yards with his legs. So whoever that end man on the line of scrimmage is, whether it is Montez Sweat, Casey Toohill, or Chase Young, don't bite down too hard on the play action when it's going to the opposite side. Be disciplined. And also, if you don't have a run responsibility other than biting down a little bit, you can start to cheat upfield, take a wide angle to cut off the quarterback as he rolls. And that's something Seattle's done against the Giants 2 years in a row. That's something that the Cowboys do against the Giants. They don't fall for those bootlegs. And that really, I think, significantly limits what the Giants can do, because one way you mask a bad offensive line, Doug, is you roll, you move the pocket, you change the launch point, and you take advantage of an over-aggressive pursuing defense.
Nick, I lied. The people would be mad if I did not ask you about Deonte Banks. Give me 5 seconds on how he's been this year.
Hey, man, I have time, so I'm cool. Okay. But yeah, Deonte Banks has played well this year. Yes, I liked Emmanuel Forbes coming out. I want to ask you a little bit about him. I know he got benched last game. I was like, whoa. So that's a bad look. But I loved Deonte Banks coming out of Maryland. Wink Martindale loved him. He embraced Joe Shane after the draft pick. And I think he surrendered like 2 touchdowns. People might look at his PFF stats and be like, oh, what's that about? He's not great in zone. He has better eyes in zone than I thought. He's communicating very well. If you ask him to press and get up in man coverage, he can do that. His recovery when he is beat, because his press technique isn't quite there yet, is so quick. It's so fluid. We're excited about what Deonte Banks can offer the New York Giants. I just haven't really seen him, other than the touchdowns that he's surrendered, and those are typically plays where he's in good coverage. It's just the wide receiver made a good play on the football. I haven't really seen him get embarrassed yet, which is something you see pretty frequently from rookie cornerbacks. So we're pretty excited about what Deonte Banks can offer and his future.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Emmanuel Forbes. I bring it up on this podcast all the time. The problem when they drafted Forbes, and I'm a Forbes fan too, is that they already had 2 boundary corners or 2 sideline corners on the team. Some years ago, Kendall Fuller, for whatever reason, who played incredibly in the slot and the nickel, just couldn't do it anymore. For whatever reason, he couldn't. He has to play outside. Benjamin St. Juice, while they continue to try to move him into nickel, his length, he reminds me a bit of Richard Sherman. He, again, a guy that needs that boundary line to kind of help him do what he does best. So when they drafted Forbes, my problem was, it was like, well, what was the plan? And in fact, that's why they had to draft Quan Martin in the 2nd round, I think, because they expected him to play the nickel, realizing all of a sudden we have no nickel, we have 3 outside corners. So I think Forbes will be fine. Fuller's contract, I believe, is up in a year or 2. That'll be fine. So I think they cannot afford to have the struggles of a rookie corner right now while they're trying to win football games. And also, I looked at some of those, and it's like, yes, 2 of the passes to DJ Moore went for big touchdowns, but it's because Forbes bet and lost. You know what I mean? Like, he was there.
So close.
It's so close to knocking that down. And it was this Kendall Fuller did on the other side. Like, sometimes it feels like they're having bad games. You go back and watch, and it's like, oh, man, they were so close right there. And, oh, they were so close. So I think he can get there. They don't have time for him to get there right now.
So I wanted to ask you real quick, because I liked Quan Martin a lot. So I loved your guys' draft. Because Quan Martin, turning on his tape at Illinois, I was just like, this guy could do a lot for Wink Martindale's defense, because Wink Martindale prides himself on being positionless. Quan Martin, if you want to play him at safety, he can. I felt like he was undisciplined in coverage. His angles were not good, but the athletic ability just popped, like a different type of athlete. He didn't.
And that's why they drafted him.
He didn't dress in week 2. Am I getting that right? Didn't he like?
Yeah, he didn't. He has not gotten a lot of snaps so far, but it's also a team that had Cam Curl and Derek Forrest and Percy Butler that they drafted a couple years ago. So, like, when you ask the coaching staff what's going on with Quan Martin, well, he's sitting behind a bunch of good safeties. So again, it's like when you draft these guys, and I think, and I don't know this for sure, but 2 years ago they drafted Fedarian Mathis out of Alabama because I don't think they thought they'd get Deron Payne re-signed.
Mm.
Deron Payne goes off on one of those all pro double sacks years, and you have to give him the money. Now you've got. I think Quan Martin also was just as much a signing in case they can't get Cam Curl re-signed. That
I
they've
talked
got
about
another guy in the wing. But to your point, I talked to Jim Nagy right after the Senior Bowl, and he told me that Quan Martin was the biggest riser on their board. And in fact, he had him over a guy like I would have preferred Brian Branch got picked
yeah.
one spot before Quan Martin, literally one spot. But
Oof.
Jim said, listen, the athletic traits are what you're betting on here because if you can get him right, he can cover every blade of grass on the field. And so I think they're slowly bringing him along in Washington, hoping he'll be one of those every blade of grass guys, and also not trying to put too much on his plate at one time. I think is what's going on now.
It's probably a good assessment. I really liked Quan Martin. Cam Curl's another player that I every time the Giants play Washington, I'm like, oh God, I can't wait to watch Cam Curl. And I feel bad saying it as somebody who's a Giant, but I'm like, Cam Curl's just. And again, I could be off because I don't watch him every game. I don't know how Washington fans view him.
Oh, he's very good.
Oh, he's so good. And at Force, I like him too. The other safety, he had this crazy interception against Jalen Hurts last year, where he basically baited Jalen Hurts to throw the deep post route, and that was the
Mhm.
game where you guys upset Philadelphia. So I was like, who the hell is this kid? I was like,
Yeah.
damn, yeah, no, you guys
And watch out for 35 this week. Is back up. Percy Butler is faster.
okay, okay, yeah, I don't know much about Percy Butler, so I'll definitely
Yeah,
keep an
fifth
eye out
round
for him.
pick 2 years ago out of small school in Alabama, I think, or Arkansas State, something like that. But and actually, it was one of the Louisiana schools. At any rate, he flies, and they like him every bit as much as they did Forrest. They thought maybe he'd take the same kind of jump before Forrest got hurt. So yeah, pay attention to 35. I'm sure he'll do terrible this week after I say that. But
No, still, no. I love the fact that you're giving me this insight. One more thing, too, actually, I wanted to ask you
sure,
about Jamin Davis. He was a player that
yeah.
Dave Gettleman, our former general manager, was reportedly wanting to draft that year that the Giants ended up taking freaking Kadarius Toney. At least they traded back to get the 7th overall pick in the next draft, which ended up being Evan Neal, which isn't really developing that well. But how has Jamin Davis acclimated to the NFL?
He's gotten better every year he plays, and I think that's probably the best you can ask out of him. I'm sure David Gettleman saw the same thing that Ron Rivera did, and it was like, the next middle linebacker.
Mm,
Here's the next one we have, and the problem is that wasn't him. So the problem with Jamin is he's gotten better every year, and this one being the pinnacle. I think he's playing the best ball of his life. He's reading, he's acting fast. They don't ask him to wear the green dot, which allows him to move a little better. They play more of that 4-2, so it's usually him and Barton out there. The problem is if you drafted an off-ball linebacker at 16, I'm sure you thought he was going to be that next great,
yeah.
Roquan Smith or whoever the next middle linebacker is that everybody loves. And I don't think he's ever going to be that guy. So, how expectations versus reality, right? How good can
Yeah.
the strong side linebacker be just in as far as you drafted him at 16 thinking he was going to be Roquan? He has that speed. He had like again, the Washington just drafts Raz constantly, right? I mean, that's you've got to have a certain score. They generally don't look your way,
Yeah.
and that's what it was. He was another. He reminds me of Quan Martin. He was a lump of clay that as this group just got started, I think they had time to. But I think he's getting where they thought maybe he'd go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, it'll
interesting
be fun to watch.
because he hasn't really jumped out on any of the film that I've seen against the New York
He doesn't.
Giants. Yeah, so I'm just like, I'm like, what was that pick about? Jahan Dotson, by the way, and again, I just keep extending this. I apologize. It
No,
gets a
I've
little bit
got
big.
nothing but time.
Yeah, man, it's just Jahan Dotson. I loved him at Penn State, and he was picked in the first round. I thought he might slide to the second round just because he wasn't the biggest, and so I look at him and I think he like had 2 touchdowns for like 159 yards against the Giants through the 2 games that they played last year. Terry McLaurin tears the New York Giants up. But what the hell is going on with Jahan Dotson right now? Why isn't he
The fan
used?
base is asking the same thing. I mean, it's a great question. Last year, it was a 6 or 8 touchdowns, and that was in limited work because he got hurt. And I think everybody thought he was going to be the next. best thing. And I'm with you. Frankly, I would have drafted George Pickens there instead of Dotson. But I mean, we're just splitting hairs at some point. What the problem is this year, I'm not sure. Like that catch, he misses the catch against the Falcons, and I mean, Sam just laid that thing in there, and it's a catch that you saw him make all year last year, and he's just not making them. Diami Brown has not shown up. I thought for sure when Sam got the starting gig that it would at least give Diami a little spike, but it just
Mm.
doesn't. And I don't know, Nate, how much or Nick, I don't know how much that is all the weapons that they have to get around to, right? Like they're still throwing screens to Brian Robinson. They're still trying to throw screens to Gibson. They've got Terry, who you're hoping to at least force the ball to 8 times a game. You've got, you know, miss out on all this is Curtis Samuel, who is having maybe the best season of his career, and they're doing all the cool things that you can imagine the Kansas City West Coast offense does with a guy like that. So, I mean, I think part of the problem is Dotson's getting like 3 targets a game in the game that they lost to the Bears. This was an incredible stat. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson split 18% of the target share. Not each one got 18%
Jeez.
of the target shares. Together they accumulated 18, and it's crazy. You just can't do that. So I really think that's his problem is that there's so many weapons out there, and we haven't even talked about the tight ends that it's just I'm sure Dotson will have a game where he gets 9 catches for 2 touchdowns and 120 yards, but he's going to also have these games where it's like 2 targets for nothing.
I know you guys use a lot of 11 personnel, and I look at Jahan Dotson. I think he had like a 49% slot rate, if I'm not mistaken. More slot than I anticipate. I thought that was more of a Curtis Samuel thing. But when you look at the construct of the Giants defense, they like to they haven't ran base personnel in the last 2 weeks. I think they're going to run a lot more base against Carolina. And when the Giants are in base, they have a tight odd front. So you have 3 guys in between basically the like 2 4-eye techniques and then a nose, and then 2 edge rushers who are on. So you have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. And that's what the Giants like to do. And typically what teams have done to exploit that is operate quick passing attacks over the middle of the field. Because with 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, you're gonna have one less guy to guard the intermediate, and this puts a lot of stress on Okereke, puts a lot of stress on Micah McFadden or Isaiah Simmons. Apologies, but Simmons only really plays on 2nd and 6 plus and nickel package and stuff like that. So I'm curious to see how Washington uses their quick passing attack, quick game against that level of the defense when the Giants do decide to gap themselves out and put 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. Logan Thomas is one name that comes to mind for me just because he's your tight end and he's going to be operating and feeling out the zone coverage and finding the voids in the zone. He has a pretty high target share in this offense. So what are your opinions of Logan Thomas and what's going on there? Because I look at him like Andy Reid comes from the Eric Bieniemy comes from the Andy Reid tree. Like, is there something there?
Well, he is not Travis Kelce. I think we
No.
can agree on that. But it's funny. I actually had just brought this up on the podcast yesterday. What's going on with Logan Thomas because he didn't have much of a game, and my co-host said, "Well, go back to the Bears game where he got like 12 targets for 8 catches and 90 yards." So again, I think, and I appreciate this from Bieniemy, right? Because it would have been easy to just come in here and say, "All right, you're Travis Kelce, and you're this guy, and you're that guy. We're going to run that offense," and that's not fair to everybody. I think he's done a good job of really using what we do best, and that's the 3 receiver sets, and they've been good at it so far. The key for them is running the ball.
Yeah.
They have not been interested in running the ball. I think the team is 3rd in the league in passing. And while it looks good for Sam, I mean, give him credit. They threw him into the fire, right? I mean, they're asking him to throw the ball 50 times a game with no real, and they basically, I think, are the top 10 in the league and not sliding protection. Like, there's 5 guys, go do your job. And Sam, it's your job to make sure you've picked up whoever the blitzer is, because they're just not leaving a ton home. They may, crack with a running back and then slide out into a route. But for most of the time, they're not. They're just expecting him to run the offense, which makes me nervous. But also, I mean, I guess that's the best way to learn, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I'm expecting to see a lot of counter Trey and GH counter from you guys. That's what you guys did against the Giants the entire time. You're going to pull 2 backside blockers to the front side of the play to create extra gaps and have the Giants account for it. The Giants have fit it better over the last couple weeks, but it's something that has just plagued Wink Martindale's defense since he's arrived here in New York. So expect to see that.
Well, I hope so, because the inside dive they've been running the last couple of weeks hadn't been working for anything. So
we don't see a lot of
dive. Better when
dive.
they stretch the field.
Yeah, the Giants do not see a lot of dive because you don't want to run right at Dexter Lawrence.
Right. Well, you can. Then that means you can't run dive anytime you play an NFC East team, then, because those D tackles are loaded the whole way through.
Very true.
All right, brother. I appreciate this, man. This was great. We'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, Big Doug, thanks so much for having me. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Falato. That's Falato. Enjoy the game on Sunday.
Oh, brother, appreciate you.